Hello everyone, this is Tim, and this is going to be a quick video asking you a question. If you were going to come up with a Rules-lite system that you were going to use yourself for like one-shots and maybe small campaigns, what would you come up with? What mechanics would you use? What systems would you come up with? Would you have any systems at all? Would it just be a dice mechanic? Would the rest of it just be narrative and fluff and description? I'd be curious to hear what you'd use. Is there like a skeleton of a system that's been rattling around in your head for a while that you want to try to get out there? But yeah, feel free to leave a description down there in the comments of your system of choice. And I was thinking about it today, and I've noticed that instead of doing videos about things now, I tend to just put them in Facebook comments and things like that, post over on Google+. And I'm going to try to get out of that habit and try to put these things on video. So I'm going to go through and detail what system I came up with, and I'm sure it has some flaws, but this is like the rough draft. So feel free to put any critiques down below, and maybe I will flesh it out further in the future and give you guys an update. So without further ado, here we go. Also, before I begin, I want to mention that AJ Pickett has come up with a D4 system that he made a video about recently. I think he revised it too, but I'm going to put that video link down below in the dungeon. Alright, for stats, I want to try to keep these fairly low in number, and I want to ignore social stats, social skills, and social mechanics entirely. And I really want to shoot for a more immersive, sort of speaking in character style of game. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that as a design concept, because there's other games out there that don't do that. So that was one of the things that I wanted to try to tackle, I guess, with this. As for generating stats, it's kind of like the D&D standard, but a little tweak on it. Roll 4d6, drop the lowest, and then multiply by 5 for each stat. The 4 stats that I want to include are agility, constitution, sanity, and strength. These stats would only be used if a specific skill does not already cover the situation. So if there's no default like picking things up skill, then you would default to like the strength stat. If there's no like jumping out of the way skill, then you would default to agility. That sort of thing. So there's sort of the catch-all miscellaneous sort of categories to roll under. And as far as the actual dice mechanic for a lot of things, it's going to be a D100. Rolling low is better. Just kicking around the idea of a critical range being from 1 to 5, but you could also lower that. As for a fumble range, I was thinking 96 to 100, but again, if you want less fumbles, then you could lower that as well. Make it like 99 and 100 only, or just 100, something like that. Also, as far as the main dice mechanic goes, I want to include something that is like a partial success with some complications. I guess this is probably due to the fact that I played some Dungeon World, and I really liked some of those results where, yes, you succeed, kind of, but then there's also this problem that arises and causes difficulty and maybe an additional challenge of a new type or variety. So to incorporate that, I want to basically put a little range from 1 to 10 above your success range. So if you have like a 30% in a skill and you roll anywhere from 31 to 40, yes, you are successful, but you're going to have a complication or something challenging is going to pop out of the situation, or there's just something that crops up that you weren't quite expecting. So I want to try to incorporate that into the mechanic as well. So the game is going to have skills, as I mentioned, and for character generation, I kicked around the idea of having 500 percentage points to put into as many skills as you can come up with. You can make up the names of these skills, and the only caveat is that the GM has authority to ask you to rename them or reword them or to come up with some sort of other title for the skills if they're like too broad or vague, that sort of thing. So again, there's some give and take here with the GM and players, but you're definitely going to have that in a lot of Rules-lite games. So 500 percentage points, come up with some names of some skills, plop those percentages down, and away you go. As an optional rule, the GM can come up with a finalized list of skills for you. That way everyone's on the same page and you're all rolling like spot checks or perception checks, whatever the name of the skills the GM comes up with. So this is for those GMs who like a more consistent nature to skills. I wanted to include something in the system that could incorporate culture, race, and species bonuses. So a player and possibly the GM can come up with these cultures, races, species, what have you, for their setting of choice. The only caveat is that you have 100 percentage points to spend around in the various skills to basically show the influence that that has had on you. You know, what you are and what your upbringing was like, what the culture was like that raised you. So these are all going to be incorporated into your character via those 100 points. As for initiative and combat, I want to try to go back to an idea that I had in my simple initiatives video. Initiative goes from 1 to 5, and you can only use one of these numbers every 5 rounds. And after the end of the 5th round, it refreshes. And you're going to basically keep track of this with playing cards. As you spend a number, you put it face down, and you're going to have 4 numbers left. So it's really kind of tactical, and you have to decide what number you're going to pick. If the 3 characters or 2 characters pick the same number, then they will go on simultaneous initiative. So you're trying to guess what the other person is going to pick, and the GM is basically going to do this for the side of monsters that they have. And another thing that I thought was kind of cool about going from 1 to 5 is that you can just hold up your hand and tell people what your initiative is when the GM asks for it. So it's simple, it's easy to represent at the table, and it should speed things up in combat. The next thing we're going to talk about is the defense rating, which is an average between your agility and your constitution stats, plus any armor or magical bonuses your character possesses. Armor bonuses are normally in the multiples of +5, with better armor getting higher bonuses. If your defense rating is above 50, you can take 2 hits in combat before you're taken out of the fight. So that doesn't mean you're killed, that basically just means you can no longer continue. And if your defense rating is under 50, you can only take 1 hit in combat before dropping and being out of the fight. So when you're taken out of the fight, you can only take defensive actions, or try to bind or heal wounds, that sort of thing, move away. If you take another hit while you are out of the fight, you are then slain. So that's sort of a replacement mechanic for like hit points and armor class, and we'll see. It's yet to be play tested. That's what I kicked around in my head today. I'm going to use a shield rule. They do not add to your defense rating, but when an attack successfully hits a target, there is a 1 in 6 chance that it can be blocked by a shield. And this is from Dragon Warriors. I always like that rule. Better shields or magical ones have higher ratings such as 2 and 6 or 3 and 6. Your offense rating is an average between your agility and strength stats, plus any weapon or magical bonuses your character possesses. And these bonuses are normally in the multiples of +10, so a little bit better than the defense rating, with better weapons and magical weapons granting higher bonuses. And again, with that critical thing, if you roll 95 to 100, an attack fumbles, and if it's 1 to 5, it's a critical hit. As far as what a critical hit means, basically instead of it would basically just take you out of the fight automatically, or if you only have 1, like 1 hit takes you out of the fight, it's going to slay you automatically. So a little lethal there perhaps, but kind of kick that idea around. As far as magic rating, it's an average between your constitution and sanity stats. Magic bonuses are normally in the multiples of +5 with better magical artifacts, and bonuses, magical doodads, spells cast on you, that sort of thing. This rating is also what a character rolls to resist a spell that targets them. So, I always want to have something that someone can roll to negate something, but I also wanted to switch it up a little bit, where a successful roll does not entirely negate a spell, ever. It just reduces its effects, reduces the length of the spell, reduces the damage of the spell, but there's no 100% negation of what happened with that spell. Because the spell roller, the spell caster, basically the person rolling to cast the spell, there's a chance of failure there, so I want to try to incorporate that. So if a spell goes off, it goes off, but it just depends on how successful you are at resisting it. Either you're going to get a full effect or a partial effect. As for the magic system itself, I want to try to do something that's a little bit more freeform, but has some guts to it. So this is what I came up with. So you put 5 different colored dice into an opaque bag that you can't see through. Each one of the colors represents a different source of magic. And this would really depend on your setting and what you can come up with. If nothing else, you can default to like the Magic the Gathering sort of symbols, what they stand for. When you cast a spell, you pick 2 of the dice out of the bag, and you really want to make sure all the dice are the same size and shape, so there's no real cheating going on. But your spell is going to be random, and it mixes elements from those 2 different sources of magic to produce its effects. So those elements that you pull out of the bag will greatly affect the results of the spell. The description and intent of the spell is left up to the player, and the GM can sort of modify things based on the roll. So you're going to make that roll again, which is your magic rating. It's a D100 roll, and you want to try to get under your magic rating. If you roll 1 to 10 above your rating, kind of the same thing with the skill rolls and stat rolls, you get a partial success, and something very interesting happens that may or may not be beneficial to your character. And same thing with spell fumble, 95 or 96 to 100, depending what you want to do. If you want a higher percentage of spell fumbles in your game, you can raise that. Maybe magic's a lot more dangerous and chaotic in your setting. But yeah, fumbles, something bad happens. And once again, the target gets a resistance roll. But as far as, so like the player would come up with an intent. Like, I want to try to do this. And then he pulls 2 of these colored D6s perhaps out of a bag and says, well, okay, we have a source of magic of death, and we have a source of magic of life. How on earth do those 2, opposite extremes blend together to produce the effect that I want? Or how does the effect really become almost different than I had intended? So I kind of wanted to sort of focus on the idea of magic being chaotic and the sources of magic being very important. You could also incorporate the surroundings that the person is in. Maybe that could be like a 3rd additional one that you could add into the mix. Maybe it would add extra power, but maybe add more randomness to the effect of the spell. So as long as the players were okay with random effects that kind of do what they want, but maybe in a different fashion than they had anticipated, I think this would be kind of a cool system to mess around with. Also, again, try to have some more give and take between the players and the GM. The players aren't always going to get what they want, but the GM shouldn't always say no either. Sort of like redirect or bend or shift the idea depending on what comes out of that bag. And I also thought of a divine sort of version of this, where each color D6 could represent a different god. And maybe if you have a ton of gods in your setting, like within the Ring of Fire, you could come up with 77 different types of dice. However you want to delineate, which dice means what. I also kicked around the idea of rolling these dice. I'm not really sure what that would prove or do, but it's some sort of thing that's bouncing around my head as far as what to do with it. But I just like the idea of the color of the dice representing the source of magic. I think the source of magic is often ignored in some systems. Where that magic comes from, where does the power come from, and do you owe any allegiance to it? But yeah, maybe there's some corruption roll where if you you roll these dice and you get a higher number, maybe you get more corruption from it. Just some ideas to kick around. But that's pretty much the system. I thought of maybe an example of combat would be good, since there is a defense rating and an offense rating. I figured it would be kind of like BRP, but I wanted to have both of them roll. So the person that's attacking makes an offense rating. If they're successful, it's basically the sword is coming towards the character. They make a defense rating, try to avoid it. If they don't, they're hit. If they're hit and they have a shield, they can roll that. So there's some almost like soaking rolls and things like that. But it seemed kind of dynamic, and I kind of like the idea of rolling dice when you're trying to avoid being hit. So that's pretty much it. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'll try to have this typed up, and you can download that below as well. So thanks for watching, and I hope to be putting out more videos in the near future.